Hi, everyone. So how do you measure an entrepreneurial ecosystem? I'm here to present today the initial findings from the study, which is the first of its kind in Nova Scotia, which we are now planning to roll out across Atlantic Canada. And that is quantitatively measuring the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Nova Scotia. So as you all probably know, an entrepreneurial ecosystem is a set of interdependent factors and actors coordinated in such a way that they enable productive entrepreneurship within a particular territory, and Nova Scotia in this case. As you probably also know, this concept of entrepreneurial ecosystem has this long history. We've talked about clusters in the past, we've talked about regional innovation systems, we've talked about industrial districts, but both the research community and the practitioner and policymakers today are talking about entrepreneurial ecosystems. But how do we measure them? How do we quantitatively try to assess and evaluate and measure the relative health of these ecosystems? So Eric Stam and colleague reviewed the literature of these last 30 years or so and distilled the concept down into these 10 key elements or conditions or pillars of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And these are the things that we're familiar with: the talent, the finance, the leadership, the culture, the networks, and all of these important pieces that make up a thriving, healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the theory here is that the more you have of these 10 elements, the more entrepreneurial activity you have, the more high growth and innovative startups, and ultimately the more productivity and income and employment and well-being you have in the economy and society. So without going into too much detail of the methodology, last year in pre-COVID, in summer 2019, we randomly surveyed 396 adults in the population, including business owners and entrepreneurs, as well as surveying 30 experts who were chosen specifically for their in-depth expertise and knowledge of the business startup environment in Nova Scotia. And here's what we found from the findings. So these 10 elements of the entrepreneurial ecosystem are rated here by all of the different respondents that replied to the survey. So the top, the aspects of networking and culture and talent are seen as quite strong in Nova Scotia through the different elements there. And some of the ones that were perceived as less strong were things like financing and institutions and leadership. So what we'll do now in this presentation here is just go into a few of them in a little bit more detail. We'll look at the top three and the bottom three and pull out a few of the specific things that people were talking about there. So networking, one of the strengths of the ecosystem. 100% of the entrepreneurs surveyed said that they know other entrepreneurs in the network. Culture, also seen as a strength. Most people in Nova Scotia that we surveyed, they saw that overall people are supportive of the idea of becoming an entrepreneur. So that was seen as a positive thing. Talent, this was also seen as a relative strength. There's the perception that as an entrepreneur, you can hire the employees that you need. At the same time, there was the perception that sometimes the very highly qualified young people did tend to leave the region. So that was a challenge. Then going into the bottom three that were identified by these respondents: the financing, the institutions, and leadership. What did people talk about when they were answering questions about this? In terms of finance, the respondents were actually quite happy with the level of access to government subsidies. What they saw as a real constraint on the ecosystem was sufficient access to funding from angel investors. Formal institutions, the comments here were that support for new and growing firms was seen as a high priority for educational institutions, so that was a good thing. but respondents talked about the challenges of dealing with government bureaucracy, regulations, and licensing requirements. Leadership, the entrepreneurs and others that responded talked about that there often was, a kind of someone playing a leadership role within the entrepreneurial ecosystem that they were a part of. What they did mention, though, that it was relatively rare for a mature, large, or established firm to be part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, to mentor entrepreneurs or new business founders. Just to give you a quick sense here, Nova Scotia was part of this this first study of its kind that worked with just a handful of other regions across the world and in other regions in Canada. We have Nova Scotia there, in orange, Alberta, and Montreal came out quite well in the overall assessment of the entrepreneurial ecosystems, comparing to different regions around the world, including Bratislava and Slovakia, Cairo, Egypt, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and others. So lots more to come in terms of future findings from this research. But in summary here, for Nova Scotia, it was perceived that more work is needed to develop the angel investor network. Universities are generally well perceived, which was good. But the mature and established firms were not generally seen as an important source of knowledge or mentorship in the ecosystem. And perhaps there's some more work that can be developed there. And we are now have plans to expand this study to cover all of Atlantic Canada and kind of take this brand new methodology and cover Atlantic Canada, and we can look at strengths and weaknesses and see how different Atlantic regions compare with others, both across Canada and around the world. Thank you so much for your time, and happy to connect and continue the conversation further.
Have you considered the strength of the Canadian supply chain? Prior to COVID-19, we assumed it to be incredibly strong. With the onset of the challenges of COVID-19, we now know it is as strong as its weakest link. When you think of Canada, we think of the richness of the country. We think of the huge farmlands, incredible fish stocks, the strong resource sector, and other great service sectors, all of which we are incredibly proud. As our country and our businesses grew, it was important to address the need to be efficient and to reduce costs. We moved large portions of our manufacturing offshore, and we used our supply management models to manage the supply and demand. This was a model that, for the most part, worked really well. With the onset of the pandemic, it became clear that our model, while good, had a major flaw. That was, for certain parts of our supply chain, we had all our eggs in one basket, and it was very apparent we had not leveraged the richness of our supply chain. Canada's economy is driven by small and medium-sized enterprises. It's truly the strength of these enterprises spread across the country that enable us to feel comfortable in saying we have a strong supply chain. As of December 2017, there was approximately 1.1 million SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada. Of this number, roughly 15%, or 170,000, are women-owned, 8%, about 88,000, are minority-owned, and 2%, about 18,000, are Indigenous-owned. While these are not discrete numbers, if I added them all up, it would roughly say that about 25% of our SMEs are diverse. Think of that, and then think of your supply chain. How many of your go-to suppliers are diverse? Did you know that Indigenous business owners start companies at 9 times the average? Women at 2 times the average rate, and minority business owners at 1.5 times the average? What this means is that diverse businesses are opening at a faster rate than mainstream. This information is important as we look to rebuild our supply chains. Recently, in conversation with one of my corporate members, they shared that they had built their supply chain to address efficiency, cost, and risk. As a result of this, they had contracted with a number of manufacturers in one country to ensure that if one company had issues, they could utilize the alternate companies. But who would have thought that an entire country would be at risk and would close their borders? Guess what? The new plan is to build a comprehensive supply chain that incorporates multiple countries, as well as Canada, with multiple suppliers inclusive of large, medium, and small suppliers. This new comprehensive model, coupled with the inclusion of diverse suppliers, will lay a foundation to mitigate risk, manage the flow of goods and services, adjust to different delivery requirements, and allows flexibility and innovation to bubble to the surface. If your business model is not leveraging diverse suppliers or has not leveraged diverse suppliers in the past, as you pivot, rebuild, or realign your needs, this is now the time to leverage that diversity. In Canada, we say that diversity is our strength. Let's ensure we utilize that not just in our workforce, but all across the country, and in particular in your supply chain. Diverse suppliers tend to be smaller, but more agile and flexible in their service. As a number of these companies are newer, they tend to not to be tied to bricks and mortar, and this enables their differences in costing processes, but most of all, this allows them to be innovative in their approaches. As supply chains are being recast, I encourage you not to repeat what you had yesterday, but to integrate local and diverse supply chains with global supply chains. As you look at your business models, there will be distinct areas where innovation and flexibility are required. And it's in these areas where you want to take advantage of these diverse suppliers. Is there a quick fix, or is there a perfect solution? No. But this is certainly a great opportunity to leverage diversity in your supply chain. The impact of these decisions will be widely felt in our businesses, in our communities, in our economy. Where do you begin? Well, let me say. You start out by identifying, do you have diverse suppliers in your supply base? So benchmark your supply base. Then depending on the results of your benchmarking exercise, you may want to establish alliances with diverse suppliers or identify organizations who are able to provide you access to diverse suppliers. Then identify areas in your supply chain where it might be at risk and where local and diverse procurement will be important and will bring strength to that area. Begin to cultivate these supplier relationships, and as the procurement unfolds, and as you begin to integrate diverse suppliers into procurement, I would encourage you to measure, evaluate, and modify for continuous improvement. Let me leave you with this thought. As you build an integrated supply chain, you are building a stronger business community that will leverage the diversity and strength of our country. Thank you.
So why do we need immigration in Atlantic Canada? Population growth is vitally important to promoting the economic growth that is necessary for maintaining high living standards in New Brunswick and all of the Atlantic Canadian provinces. We recognize that all of our provinces are making significant efforts to welcome and retain increased numbers of newcomers each year. Our efforts are also aligning with the strategic planning targets as set out by our respective municipalities and provinces. The Atlantic region as a whole are increasing numbers that support much needed population growth. With higher immigration numbers, it goes to show that we are all in it for the right reasons. Our dedication is a testament to how we are showcasing our respective provinces. We are putting Atlantic Canada on the attraction map as a viable option for newcomers to consider when choosing which part of the country they eventually would like to settle in. That said, in order to completely reverse our immigration fortunes, Atlantic Canada will need to consistently welcome more than 20,000 newcomers each year. In Fredericton, we are in our second year of a 5-year immigration strategy, and in 2019, we surpassed our target by settling 1,500 newcomers. We will continue to grow that number as we have a growth target of settling 32,000 newcomers by the year 2032. We realize this is an aggressive goal and it will challenge us. However, we are a city of innovation when it comes to offering excellence in service, provision and settlement support to newcomers as they land and throughout their first years of their immigration journey and beyond. Another benchmark for success will be higher newcomer retention levels. While the region has to settle for Canada's lowest retention rates in the past years, recent evidence shows that retention is on the rise, and there are good reasons for this. How do we support economic growth through immigrant entrepreneurship in Atlantic Canada? and most importantly for me, in Fredericton and New Brunswick. Retention is critical to achieving a positive cycle of economic growth. Attracting and retaining more newcomers will also attract, repatriate, and retain more Canadians. It is fair to expect retention will continue to improve in the region since the AIP and the PNP aim to match newcomers with job opportunities, and both programs are also geared toward facilitating transitions to permanent residence for international students and foreign workers already in the region. In 2009, the government of New Brunswick agreed to fund a one-year pilot named the Business Immigrant Mentorship Program. The program had been designed by the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce in answer to the growing concerns of the difficulties newcomer PNP entrepreneurs were expressing to the Chamber and its executives. Extensive research was done through environmental scans, and we quickly realized that we were literally pioneers in this space. Within 2 years, both Alberta and British Columbia had borrowed our model, and within 3 years, our program was launched in 4 other centers across New Brunswick. The BIMP, as we came to call it, provided exceptional mentoring and educational training programs that offered PNP entrepreneurs a full overview of the standards of doing business in Canada. Soon we launched a second program that delivered more of a one-on-one approach through an incubation-based program called The Hive. The Fredericton programs have delivered over 24 cohorts and registered hundreds of newcomer entrepreneurs into our programs. In 2016, we launched a third program called Succession Connect. New Brunswick, for their efforts, have won national and international awards and have led the Canadian standard in offering a living library of the most innovative approaches to support newcomer investment success, which in turn leads to an ease and interest in settling in our province. In 2019, Fredericton underwent a significant restructuring of our immigration services as we adopted an extensive 5-year population growth strategy. Newcomers had been telling us for years that a one-stop approach would assist them in understanding and maneuvering our ecosystem. So we listened, and we did just that. We created a 3-pillar system which included settlement, led by our local settlement services agency, MCAF, advocacy, led by the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce, and economic development, led by Ignite Fredericton. At that time, I said my goodbyes to my employer of 10 years, the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce, and I moved along with the business programs to Ignite Fredericton. Overseeing the entire strategy is our local immigration partnership, which is led by a leading stakeholder group of agencies and the City of Fredericton, all of whom offer professional service provision to newcomers and their families in one capacity or another. Planet Hatch is now home of the Hive Incubator and Business Immigrant Mentorship Program, which has been renamed to Business Essentials. My role has also changed, and I'm currently Managing Director of Immigration Services, which has led me also to be the lead of our immigration strategic planning, as well as the oversight of the local immigration partnership. We are now streamlined and working very cohesively with no overlap of services or funding. And finally, I asked the question, is immigration just about numbers? I don't think so. I think immigration is crucial for our growth for so many reasons. Economic development, maintaining population numbers and growth, the richness that diversity brings, and the talent and innovation that newcomers bring with them, not to mention the investment opportunities. We all know this. What is more difficult is the understanding of the migratory trends, interests, and what we must do in order to effectively attract and encourage settlement in our eastern provinces. We know we have no chance to compete with the larger cities and what they can offer. So how do we become more attractive? And to what level of interest are we placing on the value of welcoming actual people with the needs and insecurities immigration brings with it? I personally feel that we have the true advantage in Atlantic Canada, one that has barely been tapped into. We are Maritimers, we're friendly people. We need to showcase that and really open our doors and set down the red carpets to be honest, transparent, and genuine. So this is where we must take a broader approach and greater interest in the newcomers themselves, and not just see them as the means of population growth or numbers. Rather, we must set a change of mindset from numbers to people, real people who require trust, support, encouragement, and to be treated with respect, regard, and integrity. They could have chosen anywhere in Canada to land, but they chose us here in Atlantic Canada. Immigration is and will continue to become a very competitive market, and it will come down to where they feel comfortable, safe, and included. It's how we make our newcomers feel that will make the difference. And that will account for them opening the walls and the barriers that they have up in order to trust that our words of welcome go beyond them being a number or statistic, but rather a valued and included member of our society and our professional ecosystem. Trust will keep them with us, but respect and support added to that will encourage them to invest. Investment will create new opportunities and economic harmony through our Atlantic communities. And finally, numbers are needed.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to speak today on behalf of the Council on such an important topic. Let's get busy building barns. These are the very apt words of our former Governor General David Johnston, referring to building an innovation ecosystem in Waterloo while he was president of the University of Waterloo. Building highly productive entrepreneurial ecosystems is a job where we all need to roll up our sleeves and work together to get this done. And timing is of the essence. This topic, building vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems, is one for which I have a deep commitment. As a policy consultant with over 80 reports related to the topic, as a director of the Entrepreneurship Center and professor at Dalhousie University, leading a team that built a campus-wide entrepreneurship program designed to feed the ecosystem with a pipeline of startups and talent, and as a researcher, examining how to best leverage post-secondary research on behalf of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. In the words of Brad Feld, universities should be feeders rather than leaders in their entrepreneurial ecosystems. Universities provide talent, knowledge, and spin-offs instead of positioning themselves at the center of entrepreneurial activity. Industry is well positioned to lead, generating businesses that are the engines of growth in response to market forces. However, that being said, universities are very instrumental in that they feed the ecosystem with spillover benefits, and the more post-secondary institutions can be outward-facing and embracing a culture of usefulness and engaging with industries and entrepreneurs, the greater the exchange of knowledge, and the better we can build the 21st century businesses and the skills required. A clear result from a large body of research, our own SSHRC research and firsthand experience on the ground, reveals that outward-facing university entrepreneurship programs are an efficient mechanism for building a vibrant entrepreneurship ecosystem through spillover impacts, including knowledge transfer, skill development, attraction and retention of talent, spin-off ventures. These all play a vital role in facilitating innovation activity. As a result of COVID-19, there's a need to accelerate the development and scaling of small business on a massive scale. But we need to build resilient companies ready for the platform-based economy, one in which business transactions are largely facilitated by digital platforms. Businesses need to rethink their business models, their technology strategy, and the products and services needed in a very different post-COVID-19 economy. How do we accomplish this? How do we accelerate the development and scaling of small business on a massive scale and build companies that are platform economy ready? This is where we do need a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem that has the capacity to absorb technologies. And what role does the university education play? Post-secondary entrepreneurship education, research, and skill development produce talent and knowledge spillover benefits, which play an important role in facilitating innovation. And a lot of universities have developed this very nicely. However, we still need a stronger demand pull, industry-centric approach to innovation that pulls the technology and skills out of the university needed by industry to close the chasm between industry and post-secondary education. There are many determinants of a vibrant entrepreneurship ecosystem. I outline 5 key pillars here based on our SSHRC research and firsthand experience in building a pipeline designed to feed the ecosystem. First, it is critical to understand how important a culture of entrepreneurialism is as a determinant of a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem. When David Johnson coined the phrase, "let's get busy building barns," he was referring to the importance of the strong Mennonite culture in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, a culture of paying it forward, of working together. Or as Ian Klugman at Communitech used to say to me in the early days when we were building an ecosystem here in Halifax, it is a culture of playing nicely together, where this is expected of everyone. This is not an easy task, but a critical one. Together, we raise each other up. Second, healthy entrepreneurial ecosystems emerge as a complex system of multilateral collaborative engagement among multi-level stakeholders, characterized by dynamic, institutionally embedded interaction among stakeholders. Third, entrepreneurial networks are critical at both the macro and micro level. At the macro level, networks play an important role for knowledge transfer, skill development, mentoring, business validation, funding sources, and even global connections. At the micro level, entrepreneurial networks have long been known as key contributing factors to entrepreneurial alertness for individual entrepreneurs. Much work has been done in examining ecosystem networks, and some jurisdictions have actively recruited key players to fill gaps in their entrepreneurial network. Fourth, in addition to innovation spaces or accelerators, university entrepreneurship centers play an instrumental role in knowledge transfer, building networks, connecting students and research to the business community and other key aspects along the commercialization continuum. Fifth, experiential entrepreneurship education is at the heart of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. It is important not just to embrace entrepreneurship education on the surface, but to create a highly interactive experiential campus experience to all stakeholders, including entrepreneurs, students, researchers, faculty. Here are 5 quick strategies for building a broadly based entrepreneurship program. Expand the footprint of entrepreneurial education across the university so that every graduate has access to an entrepreneurial stream, and move away from the narrow business focus towards developing enterprising individuals in a wide range of contexts to facilitate entrepreneurial behavior. Experiential or action-oriented learning that moves away from lecture-based to practice-based with a greater engagement of entrepreneurs, businesses, mentors on campus provides a deeper or higher level learning. Develop new approaches to practicing innovation skills related to assisting students in becoming skilled in key competencies. People learn experientially when they apply their knowledge, and they learn skills from practice. Facilitate networking events open to the local entrepreneurial community. Facilitate knowledge exchange, provide learning opportunities for entrepreneurs on campus. In addition to building the number of incubators, accelerators on campus, invest in network building, in network capacity building. Build a network channel for ongoing engagement with industry, entrepreneurs, alumni, funders, and policymakers. In summary, these pillars do not depend on the location or the size of the university, the business community, or the region. And when taken together, they heighten ecosystem potential. Ecosystems with strong entrepreneurial culture, experiential entrepreneurial education, and university, industry, government, stakeholder engagement achieve greater outcomes. We have a lot of work to do to build a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem. In the words of David Johnson, let's get busy building barns. The clock is ticking and we all need to pitch in to do the heavy lifting. Thank you.
The Atlantic region is well known in entrepreneurial circles. We are, well known for being a vibrant, expanding, growing young entrepreneurship ecosystem. An ecosystem is a geographic cluster of startups, kind of attempting to survive and succeed. And there are a lot of actors operating inside of an ecosystem. not just the entrepreneurial firms themselves, but the universities, the venture capitalists, governments, some professional organizations in there facilitating the process. Support organizations are very important in ecosystems, and a more relatively unknown constituent, the mature firms. So, all the great entrepreneurial ecosystems of the world have mature firms that were vital in the kind of vitalization of these great ecosystems. We had Israel and London and New York and Boston for sure, Texas and Silicon Valley, of course. Well documented with mature firms. So when I'm talking about a mature firm, I'm talking about not necessarily large companies, but companies that are, rather long-standing, stable, have been in the, kind of sector that they're in for a while, and that are important to a region. Here, construction, home improvement, agriculture, ocean industries, IT, medical and health, education, finance, business and entertainment services. So all of those relate to the mature firm category. And the key about mature firms is that they contribute to successfully accelerating and mobilizing the movement of important people, resources, talent, capital, and know-how. And so a while back, a minister of business said to me, well, what do they do? Like, what could our mature firms do? So we made a list. So these are deep sources of talent. Mature firms are deep sources of talent. And, they have the opportunity to help, lend, offer, give, advise, spend, release, promote, do all these things for young companies. So let me just briefly go through a few of those for you. So mature firms have a kind of talent that can nurture young startups because they can help validate the business model, which is vital for entrepreneurial startups. So they can help by validating the model and the minimum viable product. So use their prototype. If you're operating in a mature firm and you have any sort of ability whatsoever, use a startup's prototype and give them honest feedback. Another thing that you can do is lend them some engineering talent. Technical specialties, skilled CAD/CAM operators. These are all expensive and difficult to access resources that you might have plenty of and a young firm would love to have just a couple of hours. Lend some startups access to expensive equipment or kit, something that is really difficult to purchase or that would set a young company back a long while for a couple of hours worth of something like that. Give them feedback on product market fit. It's a very challenging area for growth in a startup, and they need to know, yeah, this prototype works, and yeah, there's people out there, but does it actually fit the way it should? And a really great thing that mature firms can do for startups is give them some access and some knowledge about qualities that are needed for mission critical situations. So document control procedures, quality consultations, advance assurance visits. So these are all things that, that you can help with as a mature firm. Now, there are other things that might be even easier to give, right? If you're a mature firm, donate your old office material to a struggling startup, or find an incubator or an accelerator who needs some of these materials, or just tell them, I have this, and do you know somebody who can use it? And advice is good, but you know what's better? Promotion. So if you can promote a startup in a circle of your network, that goes a long way than providing them with advice. Take them to a conference, advise them to go to a conference is one thing. Taking them to the conference is better. And maybe you might be able to pay their way, but while you're there, promote them and introduce them to a lot of colleagues that you would normally meet at conferences. Let me just slide this slide down here for you. Now we're in a situation of COVID, and so downsizing is an area that everybody's interested in talking about. And mature firms can kind of participate in the entrepreneurial ecosystem by the recycling of talent inside an ecosystem. So you have sources of deep talent. Some of them might harbor some entrepreneurial intentions. See if you can find anybody who's already got an entrepreneurial intention in some way whatsoever, and then, kind of seek to help them. Some coaching, some training, get them set up in an incubator. We call that the parental dynamic. And when you help move somebody out of your company who already is kind of interested in starting a business, that parental dynamic gives them a real lift in performance at their inception. So mature firms have a lot of roles to play in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and these are just a few of them. Remember that they contribute to successfully accelerating and mobilizing the resources, talent, people, capital, and know-how in an entrepreneurial ecosystem. The mature firms are very, very important. Remember, what's costless to a mature firm is priceless to an entrepreneurial startup. I'm Ellen Farrell at the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Venture Capital.
This is perhaps a good moment for me to speak a bit to what LinkedIn's data can say in general about the economy. We obviously do focus on talent, on human capital, and our 650 plus million members, our 30 million plus jobs and companies all create a data set that we call the economic graph, which paints a three-dimensional picture of our economy, of our labor market, and it tells us everything from what skills are most in demand. So for instance, if an individual lists a skill on their profile and then joins or applies for and gets a position that is paid on our platform, which lists that same skill, and then hundreds of other people around the world do the same thing, we can get a pretty valid picture of what skills are associated with what jobs and which are in demand, because they're obviously being posted now. So that idea of a three-dimensional graph around labor market information also applies to things like migration. We can tell when people are changing on their profiles where they live, or when they're applying for jobs in other places that require they be there. This is obviously going to become a lot more complicated in the age of remote work, but nevertheless, you're seeing a picture that's being painted based on LinkedIn's data of many different facets of talent. And in particular, other aspects of that that are relevant to economic recovery in the Atlantic provinces include what the interesting career and learning pathways are for individuals who are already in those provinces and who need to reskill. They need to move from one industry to another. And I have a couple examples that I particularly enjoy from that career pathway space, or even sort of the skills mapping space. And those include, in Canada, a huge percentage of the Syrian refugees that were government sponsored were sponsored based on past work, or were sponsored and in the past worked in the area of bricklaying. And unfortunately, there's nowhere in Canada where we need as many bricklayers as emigrated from Syria. On the other hand, what we've been able to see is that those bricklayers actually have a lot in common with delivery workers in terms of the skills they have. And I would describe that based on some words that I derived from Yuta Trevorason at the Center for Inclusive Design as, in essence, thick, small data. It's data about one person in which only a computer could see. Only a computer could tell that bricklayers and delivery workers had the same skills, and that you could relatively easily retrain people from one field to the other. Another very relevant and I think pressing example relates to bartenders. There's a ton of people obviously in hospitality who are out of work, and interestingly, our data show that bartenders make really good 911 call center responders. Again, that career transition requires some skill changes, but the fact that these individuals are super keen on interacting with lots of people and work well in chaos and have, again, a skills overlap between two professions that otherwise would have been likely imperceivable by a human is, I think, really helpful in cases where you're looking at economies like the Atlantic provinces, which need to transform dramatically and where a lot of people are going to need to be able to see those new learning and career pathways. The last lesson I wanted to speak to has to do with entrepreneurship. And here I'm going to get away a little bit from the core LinkedIn data that I spend most of my time focusing on. I run LinkedIn Learning for North America for workforce development and higher education systems. And in that role, I specifically spend a fair bit of time thinking about the online learning component of these career transformations. But if one thinks more generally about the skills component, and I've learned this in part from having founded 2 quite successful Canadian tech startups and spent a fair bit of time in the entrepreneurship, economic development, and accelerator communities, the lessons of what makes an individual successful, no matter what the profession, in dealing with crises like this pandemic, or even more personal crises like a move and the changes that are necessitated by, for instance, a forced migration or a forced economic transformation like the Atlantic provinces are undergoing, those skills have been basically universal for time eternal. The foundational human, often called soft skills of resilience, agility, teamwork, communication, the lists are everywhere. I can send the LinkedIn list in a follow-up to this. But in short, those skills, if we can train better and if we can allow individuals to communicate them better, because what's become clear is often skills gaps are actually in the communication of skills rather than in the individuals actually having them or the employers actually listing them correctly. So if we can train those skills better and if we can communicate them better between educational institutions, individuals, and employers, then I think we're going to have a huge advantage. And that's particularly true for entrepreneurs, where if they can combine those foundational skills with one last set of skills, digital literacy, digital fluency, I would even argue, that's when we can really leapfrog other countries. That's where the Atlantic provinces can leapfrog other regions, which is to say, if individuals can learn the foundational skills and digital literacy, then they can take their brick and mortar restaurants and move them online, leveraging the biggest company in Canada, Shopify, or come up with new business models that we've never thought of before, because they'll have those core skills, the how to use a web browser, how to create a web page, even just the basics of how to create a LinkedIn profile and represent oneself online and network, that will ensure their success as entrepreneurs.